Welcome to the History of European Theatre podcast, and thanks for joining me on this journey through millennia of theatrical history. Episode 187, Who is King Henry? A conversation with Ricky Jukes. This episode is both an ending and a beginning. An ending because it is the last of the recent run of consecutive guest episodes. Next time we will be returning to Shakespeare, Jonson and their plays. But it's also the first of what I hope will be a series of guest episodes attached to each of the very significant Shakespeare plays that are coming up soon. With the very well-known and arguably greatest of Shakespeare's plays, the task of providing some meaningful commentary is, I have found, very daunting. So I thought it would be a good idea to have another view on these plays, to bring another perspective to them besides my own. I'm also keen to have those views to be born from the practical experience of producing the plays and understanding them from an actor's perspective, and therefore as a result of close exploration of the text. I have a few guests lined up for this task, and we make a start today by going back to Henry V, this time in the company of returning guest Ricky Jukes, Artistic Director of Lazarus Theatre. It was quite a while ago, in May 2021 in fact, when I was at the end of Season 2 of the podcast on Roman theatre, that I first spoke to Ricky. Ricky and Lazarus Theatre had come to my attention as a London-based producer of classical and particularly Greek plays. In that episode we discussed the practicalities of producing ancient Greek plays for a modern audience. That episode is still out there on the podcast feed if you want to listen or re-listen to it, and although the discussion was in the context of the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, it remains, I think, an interesting and relevant conversation. Ricky Jukes is an award-winning director, practitioner and teacher based in the West Midlands and in London. In 2007 he formed Lazarus Theatre Company and is the company's current artistic director, for which he won Best Artistic Director in the 2012 Fringe Report Awards. His work is ensemble-led with actor detail at its heart, creating a large-scale, visual, visceral and vibrant theatrical experience. Ricky has gone on to direct over 40 productions for Lazarus Theatre Company, including The Changeling, Hamlet, Dr. Faustus, Oscar Wilde's Salome, Macbeth, Marlowe's Edward II, The Caucasian Chalk Circle, 'Tis Pity She's a Whore, and Dido, Queen of Carthage. Ricky also runs workshops for actors under the Lazarus Gym banner, and I've put links in the show notes to his activities so you can follow them up further if you wish. As it had been a while since we'd spoken, before we got on to Henry V, I first asked Ricky about his experience of restarting theatre work after the pandemic restrictions were lifted.
I think it's been a tricky, interesting one. I think there's some people in the industry who've maybe it's just a way of coping with it, have just sort of launched themselves in and just attack, go. And others have sort of stood back a bit and sort of either waited for other things to happen or reassessed it. And I think in our case, we've reassessed what it is we do and why we do it, I think. If there was a silver lining to that great cloud of the pandemic, it gave us time for a bit of reflection to just stop and go, what is it we're actually doing here? Because pre-pandemic, we were doing sort of 3 productions a year. And that's great for energy. It's great for momentum. It might not have always made the best work, though, if I'm being completely honest. I love that in rehearsal, that resourcefulness. Everyone's working together. Let's work it through. But actually, on the other side of the pandemic, where we've shifted to more R&Ds and workshops of things, you've worked out so much more. The perfect example of that really is our production of Dr. Faustus, which is in 2021.
Yes.
We had at least 12 months of R&D. I mean, not continuously, but 3 or 4 different workshops. And brilliantly, Jamie O'Neill, who played Faustus, who was involved in all of those R&Ds. So had gone into that first day of rehearsal, only 3 weeks rehearsal, but had gone into that first day really knowing some stuff, really got stuff under his belt. He'd tried things, played things, got things wrong, learned from that. You know, we'd really explored who this person was, even though the R&Ds were actually about technical things, because we were working with live camera and that sort of thing. In the end, that we didn't use any of, but isn't that brilliant? Because of course the R&Ds actually proved to us all that tech would just get in the way of the actor and the audience, and any interference between that line between the actor and the audience, I don't want. So it's got to help that line and got to connect that line. If it blocks it, then it's got to go. It's called, I call it interference. You're interfering with the actor. Stop interfering with the actor over there. And we found actually through that sequence of R&Ds, that it wasn't useful. And in fact, it was sort of more harmful, really. But if we hadn't had that development time, we would have probably spent 3 weeks in rehearsal just working out the blooming cameras. And at some point, I would have had to pull the plug, literally, as well as metaphorically, on the cameras, which would have been really painful for video designers and the team. You know, that would have been awful.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So we're sort of, maybe it's the pandemic, maybe it's age. It brings a different perspective to it. So I think it's changed. I think also some parts of the industry want to just get on and move on, just move on, even though we are dealing with some of the more difficult negative hangovers of the pandemic, you know. But I guess that's part of theatre making as well. There's a resilience and the show must go on. Pick yourself up and get on. But sometimes that's not always healthy. Sometimes you do have to stop and pause and give yourself a break and then regroup and then rebuild. Right. And ultimately, you know, one of the things we found really one of the biggest sort of negative impacts, if you like, let's get all the negatives out of the way first, shall we? Was we just found that something had happened in acting. The technical skill for classical text had sort of gone by the wayside, and possibly more worryingly, the connection between actors had gone. That sort of magic, sort of connective energy thing that sometimes leads to complicity, but that relationship, that attitude of we can trust each other, or we have to trust each other, or that had gone. And that shouldn't be surprising after 2-3 years of you're not allowed to be anywhere near anybody else. That kind of agreement or ethos had gone. So we had to do quite a lot of ensemble building. Perfect example. Another director said to me, I said, how are you coping? How are you doing back in a rehearsal room? She was directing a production of Romeo and Juliet in between a lockdown, actually. So she was very brave. And I said, how is it manifesting? And she said, well, it's interesting. I went into the room and there was a prop just left out on the table. And she said to the actors as they were leaving, oh, just to check, whose prop's that? Who used that prop last? And everyone said, not me. Wasn't me. And she said, before the pandemic, what would have happened is a company of actors would have said, oh, I don't think it was me, but did I pass that to you? Oh, yeah, I passed that to you. And then you passed it back to me, didn't you? And they'd have worked it out as a company. Oh, it was me. Sorry, I'll put it back, or whatever it might be. But something had changed where it wasn't me, can't prove nothing. I wasn't there, you know, a kind of defensive, you know, hands-off type thing. Yeah. But luckily, I think where we are now is we've moved to a place where that's less a case. And certainly when I'm working with actors in training or some workshops that we've been doing recently on forthcoming productions, that seems to have started to evaporate. You still have to do a bit more of that work, that ensemble trust stuff at the beginning. You have to remind us and each other that we need to do a bit of that. And then they do seem to go into it. But one of the things that came out of that was because I got bored of moaning, and one of our associate actors said, well, stop moaning about these things and do something about it. And I thought, well, bloody good, fair play to you. This is when good associates are really good associates. And so we set up this thing that we've called the Lazarus Gym. And it's effectively an actor's gym session. It's a pay what you can. So hopefully it's as accessible as it can be. It's a 3-hour session. Actors come down to Greenwich, where we're based. And there's 3 levels to it, sort of a kind of a foundations basic level. And then it moves up progressively, sort of more complicated, more difficult, more complex, more technical. And essentially, it's our offer to actors who feel like, oh, maybe I've been disconnected to classical text, or maybe I want to just push myself a bit more in that ensemble making process. And touch wood, that's been fairly successful so far. So we'll continue that next year. And it's a great way of meeting new talent, because, of course, you only really meet new talent generally in auditions, which are a bit like an exam situation. You know, some people, you know, the stress of it doesn't make people perform well. But in the workshop, in the gym, it's been brilliant. It's been fantastic to meet new people and share the way that we approach text, but also see what other people are doing out there in the big bad world. It's been fab.
So to take us back 400 or so years, of course, Shakespeare and his cohorts were living in pretty much a permanent pandemic. So that must have had an impact on how they behaved, the knowledge that their theatres were going to get shut down once a year. In fact, as we heard from a previous guest of mine recently, that was a pretty brave thing to set yourself up with a site that you had to fill on a pretty regular basis to make any money out of it in that time. So I wonder how much we can put ourselves back there and think about how that must have affected them as a troupe of actors.
Yeah, well, I suspect, I don't know, of course, I suspect it's like everything in theatre. It's all about pragmatism. And so if you've got the rent to pay, or, you've got costs, every day the theatre's dark, you're accruing, debt, or you're not making any money. So I imagine there's, like, theatre managers, artists, directors, producers, chief execs now, you just put something on. You just get something on. That the priority is to get the lights on and get people in. We're, I guess, at the moment, fortunate that we're not building based, that we don't have that pressure. So we can step back a bit. There's, you still need the income. But for a lot of us, for a lot of our work, because it's large scale ensemble work, you are very often reliant on trusts and foundations and Arts Council money. In fact, at our most recent show, it's at the Playhouse, there would be no way of actually making the show's money back on just the capacity, because the capacity is so small and ensemble work is relatively expensive. So I don't know. Maybe that's underplaying it. Maybe that's sort of, well, it's just pragmatism. But that often is the answer to everything in theatre is, well, you just have to do it. And you just have to find a way of doing it. Otherwise, you need to step aside and let someone else have a go, particularly if it's an organisation, if it's a building,
So I did ask you to come back and particularly talk about Henry V, because on these bigger Shakespeare plays, I'm really interested to hear about how they seem from an actor's or a director's point of view, something I can't particularly bring to any analysis of it. And the first thing that, of course, strikes you about Henry V is we're used to the Olivier film, or a big stage production with a lot of cast, potentially, and a lot of armour and pageantry and all of that sort of stuff inserted into it. But at the centre of it, you've got this dominating figure of Henry himself, who we might go as far as to say is a proto-Hamlet, maybe, in some of the things he's saying. You get the feeling that maybe Shakespeare was beginning to reach into that internal world with Henry in a way that he hadn't quite done before, and would do with Lear and Hamlet coming up. If you decide you want to direct Henry V, where's the starting point? Do you have to decide, am I going to do a pageant, or am I going to do something much more internal looking?
Well, it's really interesting that this is happening right now, because we have done a production of Henry V back in 2014, and we're about to be developing a production as part of a bigger cycle of works. I'll just say it, let's not be coy. We're planning on doing a King cycle. So there'll be 3 plays, one company of actors playing these 3 King plays in rep. That's the idea. Lots of logistics, lots of dramaturgy to be done, but we're on that journey. And so I'm sort of approaching this new version quite differently, actually, to how we did with our previous production. So where I started last time was with who is Henry, who's the actor. And then you can start building something around them. Because, of course, interestingly, with Henry V, I find is one of his more ensemble plays, because of all the, you might consider, minor characters, but there's a lot of people you meet. And then when we did in 2014, we knew we were doing it at the Union Theatre. So quite a small, and this is people who go to the London Fringe often, this is the old Union Theatre. So the lot less glamorous, the lot less clean and comfortable one that there is now. But I quite liked that because it had a real sort of edge and, a sort of, you could smell the theatre ghosts. I think that's what they said it was anyway, whatever the smell was. But I loved that atmosphere, and you could hear the trains rolling over, and it would really cause vibrations through the building. I loved all that kind of stuff. And so I approached an actor we'd worked with quite a lot, who was an associate, Colette O'Rourke. And I said I was really interested in approaching Henry from a female perspective, and what that brings to the play if it's played as a woman. And she was up for it. She said, great, whenever am I going to get a chance to play this traditionally cast male part, let's go for it. And it's a bit of an experiment. And in the end, we ended up doing an all-female production. And we did cut down characters, and I think it was a company of 9 or 10. And so I did heavily cut the play. And again, going back to the old pragmatism thing, because we knew we were going to be in this studio space with not so much comfortable seating, and we were given the kind of brief of, can you sort of make it 90 minutes straight through? You do then have to decide what you're going to cut. And so at the time, what I did is I went through and just charted the main flow, the main plot of Henry, and then started cutting around it. So sometimes with plays, it might be the subplot that goes, or I have done it in the past where Act 5 goes. Or another play we might be talking about, Julius Caesar, the whole of Act 1 goes, and you start with Caesar's death, for example. So finding a dramaturgical concept that can get rid of an act, get rid of about 45 minutes, but the bit you still present still makes sense. But interestingly, maybe the pandemic, or maybe I've grown up. One of the biggest differences now, the way I'm approaching the King cycle, is let's just make sure absolutely that we're still providing the context in which that lead character lives. Because something I say now with actors in training all the time and in workshops, context is key. And looking back on some of those productions, like the Henry V in 2014, if the context of all those other characters aren't there, who is Henry? And that's where sometimes I watch theatre now and go, oh, it's in a vacuum. It doesn't live anywhere. And so there's no context. So you sort of lose quite a lot about what makes that person that person. So it might be, I guess some other directors might approach it from, again, the lead character, because who's my star? And Henry V attracts celebs. So
absolutely,
it's a producer-director conversation, perhaps. We don't do that so much, if at all, actually. It's about the actor that I know I can really work with and explore something with, they and I have a trust that we might go somewhere that's not particularly traditional with that production, or we might be exploring things differently to how that might be generally received. And I think we can get into bigger and bolder worlds then if that kind of lead, I don't ever use that word in rehearsal, but if that leading actor and I have that relationship and we're on a similar page of what we want to sort of explore, or observations that we found out from the play. So my approach has slightly changed this time, because now I'm really doing far more work on what you might consider more of the working class characters. In particular, we workshopped recently a scene in Henry V where Henry goes amongst the soldiers at night, and you have that
yes,
Williams exchange. And in an original draft for the 2014 version, I'd cut that scene, which of course some people were like, how dare you, and now
that does seem pretty brave to cut that one in particular.
That's putting it nicely, Phil. I think you're saying brave. I think it was stupid, and we ended up putting it back into that version, actually, but I certainly wouldn't dare cut that now, because you go, actually, this is what provides us that context to the person or to the character of King Henry. Interesting, isn't it, that play is called King Henry V, so you, as opposed to Hal in the plays that before it. So the audience, or we definitely know it's the new chapter in this person's life, but actually feels to me like a journey they're going on. Just because the crown's on their head doesn't mean they are the finished product, of course. So the journey of listening to his subjects, or isn't it interesting, he has to perform, he has to pretend. He can't go into that camp, I am the king. He knows that the relationships have changed. And so he has to disguise himself. And I think you learn an awful lot about him. Now, some people listening might be going, well, of course, how bloody obvious. But I think also the other big thing that's different is pragmatism. The King cycle won't play in that sort of 90-minute studio theatre version. No. I can't really talk any more about that. But let's say the seats are more comfortable. So we've got space. So the production will have space. And I don't know how relevant this is, but I've also, since the pandemic, it's like life before the pandemic and post-pandemic, isn't it? I've become a convert to the interval.
Oh.
Yeah. So pre-pandemic, I hated them. And I always felt that they lost the flow of a production and a play. And we don't need a break. Just keep going, And when we were doing The Changeling in 2023, so this is a recent conversion, the theatre, so the Playhouse where The Changing played, pretty much insisted there was to be an interval. They didn't say you have to, but it was heavily implied you really should. So, and how begrudgingly, okay. So I found where dramatically that makes sense, and it does. And there is a great place in the play where you could take an interval. But I am an absolute convert, because in the interval I went out into the bar, and of course people don't know who I am, so they don't click that I'm earwigging. But the interval is a great place for the theatre maker to listen what's they're thinking so far, what are they getting, what are they not getting. Whereas normally I'd have to wait to the end of the whole thing, and then you might be missing detail. And it was just wonderful to hear people checking in with each other. Oh, is that the husband she's meant to be marrying, or is that the guy she doesn't want to marry, or is that the guy, they were checking in with each other. Oh, that's definitely the husband she wants to marry, but the other one that was murdered she didn't want to marry. And so they were working the plot out, and I thought that because of my sort of snobbish, perhaps arrogance as a director, no, we don't need an interval. I was probably thinking I don't need an interval, but maybe the audience, it's useful for them. And it gives them the space to think, digest. And if the play, like The Changeling or Dr. Faustus, has any particular sort of triggering moments, it might be a chance for an audience member to say, actually, I'm not going to go back in. And that's fine too.
Yeah.
Or what we found with Changeling was a breather that they could then go back in. So I'm a bit of a convert. So again, approaching Henry this time, I'm approaching it from an ensemble point of view, building a company of actors who can do all three plays, and the person who will play Henry will play other roles in the other two plays. So I'm approaching it from a community point of view, from the context point of view. So maybe we should check in again after we've done that. And which one was better. But yes. It's really interesting revisiting a play, but with a completely different brief.
Yes, I'm sure. And do you have to worry about the jingoistic nature of some of it? I mean, I think you do have to worry about that, but do you have to make a decision up front about how much you're going to play into that or not?
I don't think we haven't so far. I think you're right that you have to check in with what is jingoism, what is it political? Yes, all theatre is. What is the politics of Henry? Some of the politics of the church at the beginning of the play are deeply problematic. I'm talking about the on a piece of A4 pages, it's 7 pages long. The whole you're right. I've got the title of it now, but essentially why you can go and invade.
Yes,
the church,
the Salic law.
That's it, Salic law. Yeah,
yes,
and that at the moment we're very much at a point of, is Shakespeare making a political point? Is he coming down on one side? I generally think he isn't. He's the great sort of equivocator where he's putting the arguments out to make the audience debate it. So we're in that very interesting starting point where I'm not really interested in saying, aren't we brilliant? Everyone get your bunting out. I find that all a bit ick, actually. I find that a bit distasteful. Isn't it funny when we look back at wars of we've just recently... VJ Day and VE Day and those sorts of things. And we look back at sometimes commentators look back on the good old days. But it's very interesting when you then actually do speak to some of the people who lived through that. Obviously, they're few and far between now. But when you listen to radio interviews with people, it's not very long before you find out it wasn't all Victoria sponge cakes and street parties, And I think Shakespeare's getting into the sort of... the nitty gritty, the realities of what it's like. Interestingly, I don't know if this is interesting, but to me, we've actually got, because we're based in Greenwich, just down the road from Woolwich Barracks, we've actually got a military consultant on the cycle, actually involving the military. Let's hear from their perspective. Are there things in the play that rings true to them? Are there attitudes in the play that rings true or false to them? Just giving us a little bit of extra, because the actors I'm working with haven't been through any military training, and it may come as no surprise to anyone listening, neither have I.
And I suppose no surprise to anyone who's looked at a bit of Shakespeare that he can present a Henry who is both the king in command and the commander trying to work out how his soldiers are feeling. Yeah,
and a man in a leadership position, a man or a person in a leadership position who possibly doesn't really know what they're doing at all times. And all of those things can be true. I think that interesting conversation as well about what is a king. And that's going to be particularly interesting as we're putting Henry against two other king plays. You extend that out to what's a leader. what's good leadership. I was struck by an article that Rufus Norris, the outgoing artistic director at the National Theatre, wrote. It was in the Stage newspaper, and he argues, or he puts across his point, that you don't have to lead from the front. And he puts his sort of leadership in the middle somewhere. And so some of the criticism perhaps I've heard about his leadership, he's not like Nicholas Heitner was, that was very at the front of the pack. And so some of the criticism, well, he's not very visual. He's not very, he doesn't lead from the front. And we've had an interesting period of, well, does an artistic director have to always be at the front? And I think that's a really interesting argument about leadership. And I think that's what Shakespeare's really sort of scratching away at.
Because he does push Henry out in the front in ways, because Henry's nobles don't play a part in the way nobles do in the other history plays. I was struck by that. Well, there's the three traitors, and everyone else is just saying how wonderful Henry is, how changed he is, and how much we support his right to do what he's doing. So it does feel like a very Henry-centric play, apart from you've got all these what we'd call minor characters, in inverted commas, who are the soldiers doing the hard work of winning a battle. And it seems to me that in some ways they're the real stars of the play.
Yeah, and that's interesting. We were looking at that early scene in Henry V, and actually there's a way of playing it. And so something we just observed, we didn't put an agenda onto this, because I find if you put an agenda, let's play it like, it kills any kind of creativity or invention. If you actually just play it and let's play that with a bit more pace or less pace, you find that the outcome is far more exciting than if I'd said, let's play it like they're trying to do this, or it's giving us the actor kind of the framework but the space in which to play. And actually there's a version that was quite impactful, where actually in that first scene Henry really has no idea what to do, and it's the church that is the final push. You need to do this. And so then you think, well, yeah, Henry is a very on the front, because you think of the famous speeches, but wow, the play has huge moments of doubt as well.
Yes.
And so it's centric in that it's his title, he's the title character, and he's the through line, we follow him through. But I'm more aware now than ever of he wouldn't be him without all the other, as you say, minor characters. He would just live in a vacuum, and therefore we wouldn't really see that. There's a word I use quite often in rehearsals, which actors don't like, is device. So what's the device? And, and actors quite rightly say to me, I'm not a device. How dare you? I'm not a device. I'm like, no, you're not a device. But characters and situations are devices. If you think about Macbeth wouldn't be Macbeth if there wasn't a Lady Macbeth. Right. And not all flawed, tragic heroes in Shakespeare plays have a wife like Lady Macbeth. And so, so Lady Macbeth offers us as a device, a glimpse or an experiment or an opportunity to see a different side of Macbeth. Portia in Julius Caesar, I think, is exactly that. We see a quality of Brutus we wouldn't see if she wasn't in the play. So, and then you think as an actor, oh, gosh, am I just here to show a quality in that other person? Well, sometimes maybe that is the biggest device you can play. I'm here to open up or present to the audience or share with the audience a different side of them. And so I guess that's going back to the Andrews scene. That's what it does for King Henry. And without that scene, he's a warmonger, because it's just speech after speech of let's go and trash the place. I'm paraphrasing. But actually there are lots of moments of reflection. And I found the play actually last time we did it in 2014 very reflective, actually. Whether that was because it was all female, I don't know, and that's going to be an interesting experiment with a gender mixed cast. There was a lot more sitting and thinking and reflecting and reviewing than boys with their bombs running around shouting, which is quite often what I see in productions of Henry V, boys with their big toys.
Yes, I watched the Olivier film and the Branagh film almost back to back, and the difference between, well, you couldn't get two more different films of Henry V, I don't think, because Branagh was rolling around in the mud with his few little merry band of men, and obviously Olivier had his complete army, the pageant of the field, and you could absolutely see the context those two films were created in, one patriotic for wartime, the other post Falklands conflict. Very mixed view of wartime.
And I'm a bit greedy. I sort of kind of want a bit of both. And so actually you see the high pageantry of things like coronations or huge events of state. And then the high sort of grandeur, theatricality, I'm imagining it now, big bars of lights, copious amounts of smoke, incense, huge rousing music. And then you can very quickly, and I think Shakespeare does this, flip very quickly to a very tiny, small, just lit by a campfire conversation of two men. Because
Yes.
what does the chorus say? Essentially the crown is just an ornament. Lady Macbeth says something about it as well. Your esteem's the ornament of life. You just want this crown, and that's all it is. It's an ornament. It's like a Christmas tree decoration that just has power attached to it. But actually, take it off. You're just a man. You're just a person. And I say just. I don't mean that to be reductive. You are real. And so one thing we're working on at the moment with the King cycle and Henry is going from that huge moment of ceremony, and then just in a bar of music switch, boom, we're in this very human space, and the human feeling very small in this and Henry feeling small in this huge world of politics and ceremony, and because we might not be religious as aware religiously now, but actually watching the coronation of Charles III, I'm not a particularly religious person, I'm not particularly royalist, but God, that was one of the best shows I've ever seen. It was extraordinary. I mean, the stage management, I applaud them. It was extraordinary. It could have done with a bit more haze. That would be my only note, but maybe there's some fire eggs. But wow, what a moment. And interestingly, the moment of where they put the screen around him for his personal moment of the coronation, I found strangely deeply moving. But that's music, that's circumstance, that's the ceremony. And I wonder if that's what we're watching, observing, sharing those moments that this person goes through, that it isn't it isn't comfortable all the time. And I don't know, because I've never been in a position of extraordinary power, and I'm certainly not put on the world by God. But wow, that must be an extraordinary moment, mustn't it? That must be completely overwhelming. So hopefully our audience will appreciate and experience both of those things. And then you get the extraordinary peaks and troughs, that high theatricality with then that very sort of delicate mankind talking to mankind.
Yeah, exactly the reasons why we all think Shakespeare is so wonderful.
Yeah.
He does all of that in the space of the 2 hours transit.
Well, or the 5 hours, depending on the production. But yes, exactly.
My thanks to Ricky for taking the time to talk to us, and the good news is that he has agreed to return to discuss Julius Caesar when we get there. But before that, and next time, it's back to Shakespeare's plays with a look at another of his much-loved comedies, As You Like It. In the meantime, if you haven't done so already, please join the Facebook page or group, or find the podcast on Instagram or Blue Sky to keep up to date with new episodes and other theatre-related things. If you do feel able to help out with the costs of running the podcast, then please head on over to Patreon, where you will find additional content for a small monthly fee or a one-off donation for selected episodes. You can also make a one-off show of support through Ko-fi.com. I look forward to your company next time, but if you do have any comments or concerns in the meantime, you can contact me by email at thoetp@gmail.com or through the website, where you can leave me a voice message by clicking on the microphone icon, or you can write to me on the contact page. That's all at www.thehistoryofeuropeantheatre.com.